What has been your most spine-tingling, bone-chilling? I have a bad feeling about this experience. What happened? I was out walking my dog when I got a funny feeling about my dad. He has heart problems and is prone to heart attacks. I called him a few times and he didn't respond, so I started to run back and he was slumped in front of the sofa showing all the early signs of a heart attack. I phoned an ambulance and gave him basic treatment, and after the paramedics arrived they said if I had been any later he would have died. When my kids went to bed, I used to go out to the barn where I had a bottle of whiskey stashed. I'd have a drink and ponder the day, think about my late wife, and attempt to decompress. I suffered heavily with PTSD. Add to that, the recent loss of my wife, the stress of raising 2 children that didn't really know me, and intense pain from severe burns I had received before leaving the Marine Corps. It's safe to admit that I was extremely suicidal. One particular night, I wrote out a long letter to my family, letters to my children, and placed them along with my will, financial documents, etc., on the kitchen table. I went out to the barn with a .40 caliber pistol and had every intention of getting drunk and eating around. I was as low as I've ever been in my life. All of a sudden, my dad walked into the barn. He lived 2 hours away, and we hadn't spoken in a couple of weeks. He picked up the handgun, cleared it, dropped the magazine without a word. I asked him what he was doing there at 10:30 p.m. and he said, "I had a bad feeling. Let's talk." That's the one and only time I've ever seen my dad cry. That's the only time we've ever spoken in detail about our individual horrors of combat. My dad saved my life that night, and I've made sure to live my life in such a way as to make him proud of everything I do. Your dad saved your life, dude. I'm happy that he did. Glad he actually acted on his feeling. I was talking to this guy I met on a dating site. We haven't met in person yet. He kept asking and was rather pushy. Something told me not to. I stopped talking to him. 2 months later he was arrested for kidnapping a woman. They found her in his home state. He was originally from down south, now living up north. Me and my friends were waiting for a bus when a group of guys came along. One asked us for $1, which we gave him, and then they just stayed to chat. They were perfectly nice, but all 3 of us had a really bad feeling. They asked us if we wanted to come to a party with them. We said, "Oh no thanks, gotta get home." 1 week later, one of the guys was on the front page of the newspaper. He had just been released from prison for stabbing someone, and had done it again that night. There have been 2 occasions where someone whom I had mutual friends with just made my skin crawl. I was very open about it to both of the separate groups of friends and got the same response both times: "That guy's a little weird but he's great. Dunno why you're such a dong about it, etc." Couldn't explain why I didn't like them specifically, so that didn't help my cause. First guy got caught trying to lure children into his car and arrested. Second guy got caught soliciting for child P webcam services and arrested. It was the day before my wedding and I went on a walk around my very safe neighborhood. I had my headphones in and the music playing loudly. There were cars parked here and there, up and down the long street. The houses in this neighborhood have relatively large plots of land, so there is some space between the houses. About halfway down the street I came to a car that had been sat parked for at least the 5 minutes it took for me to get to it. As I passed it, I noticed there were 4, maybe 5, males in their early 20s. I didn't think anything of it. I walked maybe 50 or so more feet and got this awful feeling in my stomach. I turned around to find that they had crept their car up so that they were literally right behind me. I hadn't heard the car because my headphones were in. By absolute sheer luck, I spotted an older man and woman working in their garden about 5 houses down. Big plots of land, so they were a bit away. I booked it to them and asked if I could just wait with them. The older guy went over to the car and asked them what they were doing, and they said they were there to do some yard work for one of the neighbors and pointed to the house they were now parked in front of, not the house that they had been sitting in front of before. The guy told them he didn't believe them and to take a hike or he'd call the police. The guy then told me that the house they had been originally sitting in front of before was of a neighbor who was out of town. Because there were 5 or so houses down, this couple hadn't noticed the car or me before I came running up to them. I often think back on that incident and feel very strongly that had I not gotten that awful feeling that compelled me to turn around, and if that couple had not been in their front yard for me to quickly spot, there would have been a different ending to this story in the day before my wedding at that. Bless that old man. It's a shame that there are so many stories like this one in the thread. It was about 9 or 10 in the evening and I was heading home from a really bad date. It was a 10 minutes walk from where I was to my home and I stopped by a red light and waited. It was in the middle of the week and on the way from my date to the red light I've met like one person. So there wasn't a lot of people out. From nowhere I got a really bad feeling and I knew that someone was watching me. I turned around and there was a man right beside me. He stood just a bit too close. He saw that I've seen him and started talking about how nice the summer rain was. I ignored him and started walking. Although the light still was red, he started walking too. I speeded up for a bit. So did he. My fight, flight or freeze immediately hit and from nowhere I stopped walking. He was caught off guard and took a few more steps before he stopped too. He asked me why I stopped and I almost yelled at him that I didn't want to speak to him, that his behavior is freaking me out and told him to keep walking. He started to argue and I yelled just go. He started walking slowly. I stood still, watching him as he walked. The feeling in my stomach didn't leave. It actually was getting worse. He stopped by a bus stop and for a second I breathed out. He was waiting for the bus. Well, just next to the bus stop was an alley, a really dark alley and behind it a dark parking lot. He stared at me while he stood there. He was waiting for me. I tried to contact a friend. No answer. I hid behind some construction materials and on the third try I managed to contact a friend. She wasn't home and couldn't help me. She asked if there was anyone else there and I said no. Eventually there was a man and 2 women walking by. She told me to tell them what's happening. During this time, the guy hadn't stopped staring at me for a second. When I walked up to the group to ask if I could walk with them, he suddenly started walking away. I was right. He was waiting for me. I walked with the group for a bit but they were turning left at the next red light and I was going the other side. I thanked them for helping me. We walked our separate ways and within seconds the guy showed up again. I froze completely and fortunately the group caught it and ran over to me. The guy saw them, turned around and walked away. They walked me to my doorstep and I thanked them over and over again. I am 100% sure that he planned on doing something horrible to me. I am forever thankful for these 3 strangers who might have saved my life that night. Pretty crazy that the guy showed up again after you parted ways with the group. New Year's Eve many years ago, GF and I went to spend the night at our former roommate's new place. They were a gay couple back before it was as accepted as it is today. An hour before midnight I felt a crazy urge to go home and started a fight about it with my GF cause she wanted to stay like we planned. I won the argument and got my way and we left in such a hurry that we forgot our blankets and pillows. A couple hours later in the middle of the night someone came by and set their house on fire and both friends died. I'm still fricked up about it today cause I know that someone came by that night wanting to buy some kind of pills off one of my friends and was quite rudely turned away. I wasn't paying attention enough to see their face so I DK who it was but I know it in my bones that's the guy that did it. My god this is awful. I'm so sorry for your loss. Walked past a parked car not too late at night walking home from the gym. Noticed people inside but didn't think too much of it. Got this crazy urge to run about 10 seconds later so I ran and then sat down and hid behind a car down a side street. The car screeched out of the car park, down the street, down my side street and then these guys started yelling telling me to come out and that they're going to kill me. They slowly drove past me with their high beams on and then kept going a bit further before they sped off. I have no idea what I saw or what was going on in that car, but the whole thing freaks me out to this day. Anytime I am walking by myself late at night, if I see someone of any description I typically bolt a few moments after I have passed them. Better safe than sorry. I do real estate photography. One day I was alone shooting in an empty house, which is quite normal. I had this really uncomfortable feeling that I wasn't alone. I had already checked the whole house before I started taking photos, but I kept getting the feeling that someone else was there. The feeling was so strong that I had goosebumps and felt nauseous. I'm not a small guy, but I felt like a little kid scared of the dark. I decided to recheck all the rooms to ease my mind, but didn't find anything. I checked closets, bathrooms, bedrooms etc, but I was definitely the only one there. As I finished shooting the last room in the house, this feeling that someone was with me was so overwhelming that I pretty much sprinted out of the house when I took the last shot. I felt better when I got outside, but I still had an uneasy feeling. The realtor ended up pulling in the driveway as I was finishing photos of the front of the house and asked if the house cleaner did a good job. I said it looked fine to me, and she went into the house with her husband to prep it for a showing. When I was shooting the backyard, I noticed them both out of the corner of my eye through a back window, but there was a third person with them. I was confused because they came alone without anyone else. Turns out the house cleaner wasn't finished before I pulled up and came in. She saw a large guy with tattoos come into the house and panic, so she jumped into the kitchen pantry and hid. By the time she realized I was the photographer, it was too late for her to come out without it being awkward, so she stayed in the pantry the whole time. I'm not sure if maybe I saw her out of the corner of my eye when walking past, or if maybe I smelled her perfume, heard her breathing and didn't realize it, but my subconscious was screaming at me that someone was there. It was the most uncomfortable I've ever been inside a house like that before and made for a funny story after. I should add that I had headphones on for the majority of the shoot, so it was 100% my fault for not being more aware of everything. I just assumed it was like any other empty house, so I was listening to music right when I came in and didn't stop until I had the weird feelings. I was walking home in the early hours of the morning. A guy came up to me with a baseball bat and walked alongside me. He started making weird conversation about how weirdos come out at this time of night. He drops a $5 bill on the ground and low-key dares me to pick it up. I sped up and made my way away from him, but the vibe was undeniably creepy. I didn't pick up the money. That was just your friendly neighbor, Baseball McFiddlers. So many. The one that was the most impactful was the time everything in my body was telling me to go see a sick friend. They'd been diagnosed with cancer, and it wasn't looking great, but last time we spoke they were getting by. I sat at my desk, gritting my teeth, and then went frick it, and bolted from work. In a house full of people, I was the only one with them when they passed. Managing an overnight shift at a McDonald's, just me and another guy in the store around 2 AM. I notice a beat up Ford Falcon with a mismatching bonnet, hood, roll into the car park. One guy hops out and immediately starts casing the place for camera locations and how many people are inside. This immediately raises my suspicions, but I pretend everything's cool and serve him as normal. They must have got spooked cause they get in the car and drive off after getting their food. Once they are clear, I called police and told them what's happened along with the number plate and vehicle description. A few HRS later police come in and say they've pulled the Ford over and found a kilo of M and several semi-auto firearms on board. Later on they admitted to scouting the place for another couple to rob us later that night. Later on they admitted to scouting the place for another couple to rob us later that night. LOL. I wonder why they admitted that. Those are some dumb criminals. They could have just said they were nervous for the M. They just probably added some more time to their sentence. They must really love prison. So this was my friend's intuition, not my own, but it for sure saved our lives. About a decade ago, sometime in Jan or February, we were standing outside in downtown Chicago smoking a cig. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, she gets this worried look on her face and says, "I don't like this spot. Come over here." It wasn't 3 seconds after we took a few steps, no more than 10 feet, that this giant ice block falls off the building and shatters exactly where we had been standing. It would have crushed and killed me definitely, and her very likely had we not moved. It was so shocking that everyone on the bustling street just stopped and stared at us mouths agape. You could have heard a pin drop after that. It was insane. I never looked at her the same either. She says she doesn't know how, but she had some sixth sense thing going on without a doubt. That's some Final Destination crap. Was about 15. Took my youngest sister on a quad bike ride through some bush tracks in a shack community. We get to the bottom of a large steep hill on the outskirts where I felt I had to stop for some unbeknownst reason. Not even 5 seconds after I stop under the hill, another quad bike flew over us. The guy landed, hit the brakes and slid into the bushes, jumped off and ran over to us visibly shaken, apologizing profusely. He'd been annoying the rest of the community for a couple weeks with men complaining he is driving the tracks too fast and is being dangerous and reckless. Well, after this incident he started to drive a bit slower. My parents nearly lost 2 children that day. I didn't tell them about it until I was in my late 20s. Quad bikes are now illegal within that township for unrelated reasons. The time I noticed 3 men in a white truck following me, I thought I was being paranoid at first, until I pulled into a gas station and then out the other side, and they followed me. Even then, I was so used to being told I was overreacting that I didn't call the cops. I just kept driving, in the opposite direction from the town I lived in, until they got caught at a stoplight. I quickly turned into a neighborhood and took a bunch of random turns and drove around some more before heading home. I really hope that never happens to you again, but if it does, I was told once that if you think you're being followed, drive to a police station or fire station. When I lived in the Falkland Islands, my family and I would often take trips to a pretty remote area island where we were the only ones there. The island was pretty dangerous in itself with its dead drop cliffs and roaming sea life, seals, penguins, etc. Our bedrooms were all in the attic space. One night I had a really bad feeling. I couldn't sleep and so I went downstairs. There was a whole butt elephant seal pushed against the front door, trying to get in. It sounded like he was headbutting the door, but I'm not entirely sure. Turned out, a whale had washed up on the beach and had taken up all the space, so all the sea land life came to our little house. I was so scared, lol, that thing was massive. It was probably Wash who should have let him in. He is a nice guy. This isn't as NSW as others, but I think about it a lot. Country lanes in the UK are pretty narrow and have lots of blind bends. I was driving down a lane and there was a cyclist in front of me, in the middle of the road, not wearing a helmet, and heading toward a completely blind bend. I suddenly thought, if a car swings around that bend they are going to smash into the cyclist and pin him to my car. It was like a Final Destination vision. I couldn't hear or see another car, but I saw this accident so vividly in my mind. I immediately slammed on my brakes, honked my horn and pulled over. The poor cyclist guy shat himself and stumbled to the hedges. Mere seconds later some idiotic teenager comes speeding out of the blind corner and missed us by inches. If we were still in the road, this guy would have plowed straight through the cyclist and into my car. I completely freaked out, to the point the cyclist came over to calm me down. I don't remember much, but I know I was saying you were dead over and over again. I'm not a religious person at all, but that's the closest I've come to believing in some kind of divine intervention. Those country roads and boy races are fatal. My dad was a fireman when we lived in Wales and most of the work was attending nasty accidents that took place on those roads. Used to hear some pretty horrific stories about the various ways teenagers and idiot drivers had killed themselves in avoidable accidents on country lanes. I woke up in a panic early one weekend morning and checked my phone. Found a suspiciously sentimental text from my best friend sent some hours earlier. In the wee hours of the morning, raced to his house. He had attempted the worst. Thank God he was still alive, but I was able to intervene enough that he didn't succeed in another attempt. He's doing amazing today, just finished his masters and is now in medical school. That's what friends are for. Good for you. Work on the railway and had been asked to attend a report of a trespasser in a rough part of London. Was walking down the side of the track feeling spooked, making lots of noise and hoping not to find anyone. Saw a tall dark figure coming the other way and started to really freak out. After what seemed like ages but was probably just a couple of seconds, realized a train had pulled into the platform behind me and I was just seeing my shadow on a bridge wall. Felt stupid. Those moments when you trigger your own flight or fight response are always something. The relief you feel afterwards is indescribable when you realize it's just you scaring yourself. Not mine, but my mum's. In 2004, she had booked a flight for herself and 9-year-me to visit India. For Christmas, we got to the airport and she started having a panic attack. She's claustrophobic, so I assumed she just didn't want to get on the plane. But she was yelling and decided to leave. I kinda dismissed it because I was 9 and more focused on Nintendogs. But I asked her about it a few years later and she said she just had this evil feeling about going. It turns out we would have been caught in that tsunami. The day I just knew my good friend had died, I had this horrible sense of dread and overwhelming need to get to him. I was absolutely panicked, like I swear I could hear a clock ticking in my head. I had been texting with him hours before and we were supposed to go cut down a Christmas tree. I had to threaten the girl whose house he was at to go back to the house and check on him or I was going to call the police. She had left him there to go decorate a tree at her mom's. I didn't have a vehicle and had never been to her house, so I couldn't even get to him myself. I was on the phone with her when she found him. Absolutely gutted. A few years ago, a group of friends and I went out clubbing. We went into this one bar, and the moment I stepped in the door I felt a sense of dread. Every cell in my body was telling me get the heck out of there, so after about 20 minutes, I convinced my friends that something felt really wrong. So we left and went home. The next day there was a news story about a club. There had been a shooting on the street in front of it and the people who had committed the shooting had been inside the club while we were there. Geez, our subconscious can really sense danger sometimes when it is not apparent at all. Riding my motorbike in the Himalayas, blind corner up ahead, sudden overwhelming sense that I had to get from the middle to the edge side of the road. Massive truck that was going way too fast came about 6 inches from taking me out. Totally would have pancakes me. Further round the bend my riding buddy had stopped and was looking back with sheer terror on his face. Honestly, you probably felt the vibrations of the truck. Not that that makes it any less amazing. Just kinda fascinating how our senses work even when we don't consciously process them. Not my story, but one of my best mates was visiting Tasmania in 1996. They were due to visit Port Arthur, but her mum had a terrible gut feeling so they didn't go. Martin Bryant killed 35 people there that day. When I was 11, I stayed at my father's over the weekend. Late Saturday night, when I had gone to bed already, my father comes home from a beating and tells his wife that someone died in a car fire in the town we lived in. I heard this and at first didn't think too much about it, but I could not sleep at all that night. I had this awful gut feeling and I was terrified through the night that this person who died was my mom. Why my thoughts went straight to her, I don't know. So comes Sunday, I was waiting for my mom to pick me up, but she never came. Instead, my father got a call saying he needed to bring me home. So he did. I felt the whole way that something was awfully wrong. And when we got to my mom's house, my aunt, father's sister, wanted to talk to him. This was red flags all over the place. BC, they cut all ties years ago. She just told me to go inside. When I got inside the door, I immediately felt that something was really wrong. It was like the air was thick and filled with pain. It's very hard to try to describe that feeling. Anyway, I got in the kitchen and thank God my mom was sitting there. I hugged her and she just let out a quiet "Patrick's dead." The person who had died in a burning car the day before was my stepdad, and it was later stated a suicide, which we kinda understood immediately. There were a lot of things surrounding his death that made us understand how sick he was. The whole experience gave me severe PTSD and OCD that I to this day still struggle with daily. I turned 25 this year. Sorry for long story, and probably some typos along the way. Sorry for the pain you went through. Sending you internet hugs. The hurt we experienced sometimes is an indicator to our capacity to love. I wish you the tools and space to find peace from within. I was solo backpacking within Inyo National Forest. I had just set up camp and was walking beyond this lake and up above the tree line. After walking about a quarter mile up this meadow, the hairs on my neck began to stick straight up. Instant chills. Didn't know what reason, but the gut reaction was enough for me to return to camp. Next morning on the way back to the car, a ranger asks me to be careful. Mountain lion sightings in the area. I think I found out why my internal alarm went off. Nice that you nope the frick out of there. Definitely saved yourself. A cat once scared the crap out of when roaming around the woods with my friends at night, and since then, I avoid the outdoor places with animals at night. Not sure if it counts, but I work in a bar in Southern California, and while I was pouring a beer during the day shift, I had this very weird feeling about an earthquake happening. Nothing was shaking or anything, I just got this weird image of everything coming down briefly. 7 hours later the shift is over and I'm at home on the couch watching TV. Completely forgot about earlier. And wham, massive earthquake hits and knocks a ton of crap down in my apartment. Creepy to me. Foresharks are a thing. Small shifts in the tectonic plates that some people are perceptive of, but others are not. But they are why animals often behave erratically before earthquakes. They can feel foresharks. I live in LA, and downtown LA isn't exactly the best place at night. I was going to a dispensary late at night in 2015, in an area of downtown that's not heavily lit, and very empty. No cars, no people, just a few rundown buildings on Main Street. It was late, around 11 PM, and the dispensary was just closing up. I came out, by myself, and started walking to my car. I was maybe 200 feet from my car, and saw these guys across the street in a huddle. As I started walking closer to my car, I had this feeling they clearly weren't up to any good. So I started walking a little faster to my car, and one of the dudes screams over, "Why you walking so fast, man?" And they started to walk towards me. Rather than answer and pause, I decided to start running to my car, and unlocked it and got in. As I was starting my car, they had run up to the back of my car, and just as I drove off, one of them slashed the back of my bumper with a knife and they screamed, "Good thing you got those white boy instincts." Sometimes it's literally a matter of 1 second and making that crucial decision to not stop that saved my life. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.